So thank you for choosing to be with us today. We know you have lots of choices in how you spend this time to get in your spiritual community, and we're delighted you decided to be with us today. This week, we're going to continue our stroll through the first 4 chapters of the Science of Mind text. Last week, we looked at the thing itself, or our personal definition of God. This week, we look at the way it works. We had 12 folks show up on the Zoom last Wednesday night to explore and discuss the first chapter in more detail. It was a fabulous conversation. We started with some words that we use to describe the God of our experience. What words did they come up with? Love, freedom, mystery, miraculous, the omnis, omniscience, all-knowing, omnipresent, everywhere present, and omnipotent, all-powerful. Nature's splendor, power, love, comfort, care, ease, life and health, vibration, liberation, order, spirit, all-knowing, love, joy, and the divine wow. So in your own mind, what is your name? What is your name for the infinite presence? And maybe it's not one name, maybe it's several. Because whatever you call it determines how you experience it. We have to know what we call it, because that influences and frames how we interact with it and how we show up as it. And that's what the second chapter of the Science of Mind textbook is about. The way it works is each one of us can only have a God that we can imagine and experience, and we can only have as much of it as we believe. I know it sounds really wonky at first, but that's really how it presents itself in our lives. From page 35 and 36 in the Science of Mind, the life which we live is the universal life, expressing through us. How else could we live? Our thought and emotion is the use we make, consciously and unconsciously, of this original creative thing that is the cause of everything. Therefore, we can say that the mind, spirit, and intelligence which we find in ourselves is as much of this original creative God as we understand. There is spirit, or invisible cause, and nothing, out of which all things are made. Now, spirit plus nothing leaves spirit only. Hence, there is one original cause and nothing, out of which we are made. In other words, we are made from this thing. That is why we are called the Son of God. And I prefer the gender-neutral title, the Emanation of God. Now, this is heresy, right? For us to call ourselves divine in origin. That's part of one of the things that makes the Science of Mind teaching so empowering and also a little bit heretical in the rest of the world, because we own our divinity, God as us. So stay with me. There's a little bit more, but it's big. Back to Ernest, or Dr. Holmes. We now know that this is what we are, because we couldn't be anything else. But we do not know how much of this we are. We can only see it by looking at it through our own eyes. Hence, we shall find a better God when we shall have arrived at a higher standard for humans. If God is to interpret itself to humans, it must interpret itself through humans. And the Spirit can make no gift that we do not accept. And when I was working on this talk yesterday, that reminded me of Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address to the Congress, after he had been elected at one of the crisis points in the US history, where various states threatened to secede and then actually did, from the Union because they didn't like what he stood for and what he believed and what he thought was the right answer. And states' rights was the apparent issue, and slavery was the underlying issue. He said, I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, where again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. So Lincoln was calling on the better angels, our higher selves, our better selves, of the people that were alive then, to remember what it is that they were. And we get to look at the same thing. What is our better nature? How are we? How do we show up as our better angels? Well, you know the story about Lincoln, right? It didn't go the way he wanted. Less than a month later, the Civil War started. But what are our better angels? The phrase was first formally written by William Shakespeare in Othello in 1603, and Lincoln probably read or saw the play. Our better angels are when we align our thoughts and actions with what we think of as our God qualities. What qualities do you claim as God qualities? What qualities of God, do you recognize in yourself? And what qualities do you intend to express, explore, and experience? And do you see any God qualities outside your reach, outside your ability to imagine them? Remember, if we can't see them, we can't imagine them. But if we can embody them more and more every day. And I realized as I was working on the talk for today, that one of the God qualities that I really value and I really aspire to is the capital T truth, telling the truth, living the truth, being the truth as I understand it. I do believe there is such a capital T, such a thing as a capital T truth. And so I search to be as accurate as possible in service of truth all the time. That's just part of who I am. And the reason I tell you this is because of the next story. You've probably heard the story before, and you probably heard it as a parable that a Cherokee grandfather told his grandson. And I may have even told it that way before I dug into the story more deeply. Best I can tell, the way it actually unfolded was an American Christian minister and missionary, Reverend John Bisagno, first published the story of the two wolves or the two dogs in a book about positive prayer in 1965. The story has been picked up and expanded extensively over the years. Whether it's an illustrative parable that he made up or a story that was actually told to him is lost in time. But the story goes something like this. And the story has value regardless of whether it was an actual factual experience or a story made up to illustrate a point. A missionary visits a home of an elderly congregant of native heritage. The missionary asks him how he's doing. The elder replies, I have a black dog and a white dog inside me, and they're always fighting. The elder describes the actions of the two dogs, right? One dog does good, beneficial things, and one dog does bad things. The missionary asks, who wins? The elder answers, the one that I feed the most. And this story lives inside our minds, whether we focus solely and primarily on the negative aspects of our lives or the positive aspects. That's what we feed. That's the image that we project and the one that we experience repeatedly. And that's our definition and our experience of God. You know people, I know people, nobody in this room, of course, who are only and always focused on the negative, the difficult, and what's not possible. As hard as it is to imagine, that's their God. Their God is always shutting things down and closing things down and making them small and limited. And it's a choice. It's a perfectly valid choice people can choose to make. Fortunately, we can change our experience by changing our minds, by changing what we focus on, by changing what we think about, by changing what we perseverate on. This is the big idea behind Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich and his practice of writing a covenant with God and with ourselves and declaring the good that we claim as our own. It's also the big idea behind Emma Curtis Hopkins' covenants with God that I mentioned last week, that are described in Scientific Christian Mental Practice. It's also the big idea behind the story that Eric Butterworth tells in Practical Metaphysics that originates in 2 Kings in the Christian Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible. You know this story too. The old widow woman talking to Elisha the prophet. She's destitute. She is like broke. She has one vessel of oil left, and that's all. And she's just about ready to sell her 2 sons into slavery because she can't afford to feed them. She asks Elisha for help. And he looks at her and he looks at her one jug. And he tells her to go gather up as many empty jugs as she can find. So she does. And then he tells her to pour from the one jug she has and fill up all the other jugs. She filled up every single jug she gathered together. And that became the amount of oil she had. That was the extent of her faith. How many jugs would you have gathered? I keep thinking, bring the tanker truck. I think I can, fill up a tanker truck full of oil, because if that's what I believe is possible, then that's what's possible. And if I think I can only have 3 little jugs and I only plan for 3 little jugs, then all I get is 3 little jugs. That's the size that we have of our experience of the divine. So how does it work? How does this thing work? It works by us working on it. And if we don't work it, it still works by appearing not to work, because that's what we're working. Crystal clear, right? There are 2 other ideas that are connected to this main idea, that we have as much God, as much good as we're willing to imagine, as much as we're willing to believe in, as much as we're willing to allow, as much as we're willing to embody. 1, if we believe we are unworthy in any way, that limits our view of God, and that limits our access to the divine, because we've made ourselves small. We've created a separation from this infinite life, this God, that's not really there, except it's there because it exists in our minds. And that's a big thing, because the only one that limits us is us. And if we do it, we actually have only brought three jugs instead of a tanker truck to pour the oil in and have more goodness. So assuming you're still tracking with me as I'm talking at this point in my reminder, I want to tell you about the second thing that the way it works means. And after I tell you this, I wouldn't be surprised if you go, hang on, wait a minute. What are you talking about? Because the second thing that is included in this idea of the way it works is there is no such thing as evil. There is an experience of it. There is an experience of difficulty. There is an experience of challenge, but there is no entity, no separate being of evil. I'm almost waiting to hear the screams but I can't because you're all on mute, and that's great. Because we have this belief that there's evil in the world. And so if we were to, get together and we're just sitting around the table and we're talking about what's going on in the world, I can hear the conversation of all the things that are wrong and all the evils and all the bad things. But what's true? Is there really evil in the world? And when I'm in my right mind, when I'm telling the capital T truth, I have to ask the question, are you an immortal being made in the image and likeness of the divine? Is that other person that you're telling a story about who did that horrible thing, are they an immortal being made in the image and likeness of the divine? And is the apparent victim of this evil thing, whatever it is, an immortal being made in the image and the likeness of the divine? This is a hard pill to swallow because our human experience says that there is evil in the world. When we remember there's only God, there's only God. There is not God and something else. Then evil is a story we made up. And it's a story we tell each other. And so we reinforce this story. But it's not actually a capital T truth. Okay? So what is evil? Evil is a temporary experience, even if it lasts 400 years. Apparent evil is the result of the law of cause and effect in action. We can't see the cause, therefore we can't understand what we're looking at exactly when we look at the effect. And we never have a complete picture. If we think there's evil in the world, then our view of the divine is limited. If there's evil, there's not one, there's two. It's God and something else. It's a state of separation, of duality, and it's not unity. Because in the worldview of unity, there's God and nothing else. Evil is a story we made up. It's an experience we have. And the appearance of evil is part of the human experience. So we get to look at that picture, that appearance, that story, and look at it and say, okay, there's clearly something here I don't understand. I can't understand it because I can't see the whole picture. And sometimes it's a really horrible story, right? It's something that's really sad. It's something that's really uncomfortable or miserable or horrible. And even if it feels like it's going to be here forever, it's not. The unpleasantness, the miserableness, the horror is not permanent. It can't be if there's only God. It's a big, chewy idea, and it's important to keep working at it because this idea of God as a unity and God being the only thing there is, and we live in God, is important for our understanding of ourselves, as well as our understanding of divinity itself. So yesterday's daily reading was from 365 Science of Mind by Dr. Ernest Holmes. I won't read the whole thing. I'll just read this piece. I know how to meet every situation in calm trust and with the complete conviction that the divine intelligence guides me. I do only that which is constructive and life-giving. I have a deep sense of inner calm, a complete assurance that all is well. The same intelligence that governs the planets in their course now acts as the law of good in my personal experience and in the experience of everyone around me. What dog was Ernest feeding? Pretty clearly, he was feeding the one that gave goodness. He wasn't feeding that dog of negativity. He was focused and intent and intentional on this is my choice. I live in this space. So I want to close with a piece that I was reading yesterday in a little book called Living with Intent. The subtitle is My Somewhat Messy Journey to Purpose, Peace, and Joy by Malika Chopra. She's Deepak Chopra's daughter. Mostly, she's writing about learning how to live in balance in her busy life as a working mom with a couple of kids. She'd been to India visiting her grandparents for a week, and she'd come home. And she wrote about her experience coming home. She wrote, "Re-entry is bumpier than I would have liked. I'm overjoyed to see my husband and the girls. I'm eager to catch up on their lives. But when they start sharing the details of things that happened in my absence, I can feel my blood pressure start to rise. I try to stay calm, present, and supportive, but it's not easy. The chaos, the noise, the demands, even their stories are stressing me out. Later in bed, I try to figure out why I felt so instantly tense and realize their stories triggered that all too familiar toxic cocktail of guilt and worry. I closed my eyes to meditate, and as I breathed, I reminded myself that I needed to have faith that things would turn out okay. Instead of flying off fretting, which is to say, losing myself and not being in the present moment, in this moment, the only thing that's real is what is. Because she's jet lagged, she can't sleep, which makes her discomfort, her lack of ability to deal with it, worse. She picks up Marianne Williamson's The Gift of Change. Flipping through it, she lands on a section about dealing with stress. Marianne wrote, "Every time we think, oh my God, I have so much to do and I don't know how I can do it, we can change our thinking. We can remember that God's power is unlimited, and we can stop pretending that ours is." Malika continues, "Oh, brother, what good is that? I mean, God can't drive the kids to school or anything." And then her higher self, that still small voice, pipes up and says, "But by trusting the universe to nurture your intentions, you can release some of the stress. You can choose to let go of your obsessive worry and have faith that things will work out." She's not convinced, but she keeps reading. And then she remembered something she'd seen on her father's website, so she looked it up. The article is called 10 Ways to Live a Spiritual Life. I'll put a link in the newsletter for next week. Number 9, allow spirit to lead. Most people are addicted to worry, control, micromanagement, and doubt. Resist the temptation to follow these tendencies. Don't listen to the voice that says you have to be in charge. That constant vigilance is the only way to get anything done. Instead, let spirit try a new way and be willing to experiment. Intend for everything to work out as it should, and then let go and allow opportunities to come your way. The divine works for us by working through us. according to our deeply held and sometimes unconscious beliefs. Fortunately, our own thinking is the one thing we have control over. We have the opportunity to change our minds and change our experience. I encourage you to continue to work at that. It's not a small thing. It's not easily done. And yet that is the one thing we actually do have the ability to manage. Give it a go. Try it out. Try it out more often. Explore and express this divinity as you, this higher self that shows up as the God as you. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So I want to roll into the prayer. So if I said something useful for you that you want to remember and implement or implement more often in your life, ponder that while I speak the words of affirmation. I know this one life, all-encompassing, all-inclusive, expansive, never-ending, divine self, lives as me, lives as all life, and expresses and explores and expands and experiences for its own joy, for its own delight, for its own self-expression. And I know that since divinity does that, and since I am divine, and since each one of these beloveds is also divine, each one of us has that same capacity, has that same opportunity, that same ability. And so I redirect my consciousness to remember and practice and know and do what uplift I can, what focusing on the law of good that I can see, and what I can intend to bring into the world, into my life, into the lives of those around me, knowing that every time I do that, the amount of good in the world increases. I know this truth is just as true for every other being as it is for me. And each one of us has that same opportunity, that same gift, that same challenge to remember to focus on the good, to remember to decide and intend and allow and accept greater good in our lives, and to recognize we are already worthy because we are already emanations of the divine as us. So I relax into this knowing it's not a chore. It's not a to-do or a should or an ought to even. It's the freedom of possibility. And it's the option of stepping into the world we choose to see and how we choose to be. So I allow that. I accept it. I relax into it. And I know that same option and ability and opportunity for each and all. Letting the words be, I let them go, and so it is.